I am Lawrence Levinson, your CXPA chair, and I am so pleased to have you join us today for this special Secrets from Our Sponsors event. We are so pleased to shine the light on this incredibly talented team. So let's get started. Morana is a trusted customer client advisor and an award-winning CX professional with an insatiable passion and commitment to helping clients deliver a sustained and differentiated customer experience that produces meaningful outcomes for employees, customers, and the business. Sean draws on loyalty and CX vocabularies to innovate better, physical, digital, and people-related solutions that create return on investment and return customers. Please give Morana and Sean a warm CX welcome, and let's get started.
So fun.
Hi.
Lawrence, thank you for the introductions and the kind words. We're pretty excited to be here. A, for this conversation, and then candidly, B, I put on shoes and left the house in the middle of a work day, so that was a big deal. I see you're in heels.
It's been a year.
We're pretty excited to be coming to you from our studio here in Toronto, and looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for tuning in. I think when we said that we would do this, one of the things that I was thinking about was just kind of the hard work of this work, right? Brands are trying to organize themselves to deliver on the experiences at a time when I think expectations just continue to rise. And I started kind of thinking about that notion and was distracted by some of the other things going on in the world, which thankfully these ones are a little bit more optimistic. I'm thinking about companies who are literally taking off and landing commercial rockets back on the planet. Like, it almost seems science fiction. So although this work is hard, the work of customer experience, I kind of felt like I needed to put it in context and be like, it isn't rocket surgery. It isn't this kind of endeavor, but it takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of energy from a lot of different areas of these brands. And I think that that's something that we wanted to spend a little time double-clicking on and thinking about. By way of kind of an agenda for today, I wanted to maybe unpack what we're going to go through. There is a series of slides that Morana and I put together that are about the state of things, a little introduction on us, where we think things are going, and that light at the end of the tunnel that we're pointing to. There's going to be some practical kind of components that you can think about your business, your brand, and how to put them to work. And hopefully, we leave you with some frameworks that are useful, that are practical, born of the right principles, but something that we can use on a day-to-day basis. Is that sort of a fair unpacking, would you say?
I just have to say, I'm so glad to be here with you and our team. And I learned a new technology today. We're using our phones to progress the slides forward. So I feel like COVID has brought us a new digital innovation.
The amount of R&D required to make this work is, yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll do a little context setting to kick us off, and maybe this is just sort of like where we're coming from, the way that we look at the world. Bit of a hybrid animal at Bond. We lead with a very consultative approach, a lot of advisory services. We bring an element of imagination and creativity that would maybe be characteristic of an agency. And we're underpinned by a real technology understanding, making sure that what we are looking to do with people at the center of absolutely every one of these experiences can be scalable, can be done at speed, at sort of the speed of life, the speed of business, the speed of retail in many cases. And that focus on the human being at the center is really because of the belief that you see on the right-hand side of this slide, which is the bonds that are created between humans, whether they're one side of the counter and the other, the people that are involved in these commercial relationships and transactions, and all of the sort of less transactional components that lead to deeper relationships, they're born of experience, and that underpinning is really what drives a lot of the work that we do.
So looking a little bit deeper at the work that we do in our offices, we really focus on the customer journey. And of course, with this audience, that will be kind of very common nomenclature. And when we talk about the customer experience and the customer journey, we are focused on the entire journey. And we'll talk a little bit about the approach that we take to the holistic customer journey. But for us, customer experience is the way that your brand represents itself at every single moment of interaction. Whether that moment of interaction is an app, whether that moment of interaction is walking in to a physical location or a hotel or sitting on an airplane, whether that moment of interaction is engaging with a call center representative or a human being that represents the brand. And so we're constantly looking at how the brand and the promise of an organization comes to life consistently across every single moment of that customer journey, and where there are moments to really differentiate. And differentiation, as we'll talk through, comes through deeply listening to both your employees and your customers. And you'll hear us kind of go back and forth between the customer and the employee audience, because that is a lens that we apply to our work as well. It's not just the experiences that your customers have, but it's also the way that brands need to engage their employees and enable their employees against a common customer experience vision and purpose. And so the work that we focus on is across the gamut of customer experience, so everything from strategy and planning. So this is really around helping an organization define what do they actually want to stand for when they talk about becoming customer-centric, or when they talk about moving from a product-centric to a customer-centric organization. So we help our clients define that strategy. And then we move into experience design. And experience design is literally walking through that entire journey, understanding what the current state is, what the desired state is, and then we engineer those experiences. The experience could be the experience that you have with your employee, or it could be the experience that you have with your customer. All of this is underpinned by tremendous capability in analytics, and we have our own proprietary technology as well as a great partner ecosystem. And it's really about how we make those experiences come to life, enabled by technology and informed by data, informed by the actions that your customers and employees are taking, and allowing us to constantly increase or elevate those experiences. We activate experiences. So for those of you who are Ford or that are Maple Leaf fanatics, you will have seen the activation of Ford Motor Company. We are in the business of creating those experiences wherever customers are having them. Obviously, in the last year, it has been increasingly digital and remote, but prior to that, we were in arenas on behalf of our clients. And we will be again, yes. And then we also have a tremendous capability in generating consumer and employee insight. And that insight feeds the way that we strategize, and it also gives our clients intelligence to be able to make informed decisions about their employee and customer experiences. And so we have the distinct pleasure and honor of working for some of the most recognized brands in the world, and clients that we're exceptionally proud of. So you'll sort of see a scrolling view of the clients that we do business with. But what is true is that we do our best work when our vision and our philosophy around customer experience and employee experience is aligned with these organizations. And I'm sure that many of you as consumers or as employees can attest to these brands really having a focus on the customer and the employee.
So let's look back a little bit.
Do you want to take a trip down memory lane?
I do. I mean, I kind of do, and I kind of don't. You know, this last year has been a tough year, but okay, let's do it. We'll just get over this part fast.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a journey through time in the next section of our time together. So we'll look back a little, sort of pre-COVID, and then we'll take stock of during COVID, and then what we'll do is we'll give you a perspective on where we think organizations need to go as we approach the light at the end of the tunnel. So looking back, I'm sure some of you miss these moments. Maybe not as crowded as this, but there were times where we could just go and get a little bit of retail therapy, a little bit of relief just by walking into a mall, without having to do a screener, being able to sit in a restaurant, being able to sit in the food court, maybe have your kids run around in the local Indigo, but we were able to sort of shop when we wanted to and how we wanted to, and so this was our world before COVID.
The next one is the one that makes me want to shed a tear. I don't know, when we'll get back to the density of this in airports, and as somebody who is on planes pretty regularly, there's lots of parts of it that I miss. There's lots of parts of it that I think we could reimagine, and this opportunity now is to do so. But I think the idea of collecting as human beings, whether we were all on the same journey together or we were collecting around a table coming from the different journeys that we had been on, I think like those human moments, in a world gone wildly digital, those human moments are the ones that I think we are all so starved for. Yeah. This is the light, at the end of that tunnel.
We used to work together like this. And we were pretty excited about the way that office spaces were shaping to be more collaborative, to be able to sort of call across the computer screen and, to invite a colleague to look at something. We were literally breaking down walls and cubicles. We were trying to get closer, physically closer, in the spirit of collaboration. And this is what our world looked like. And this was the trend in terms of the way that employees came to work prior to COVID.
And then everything stopped. The pause I think that we've all felt over the last little while was stark at first, right? All of those routines, all of the fast pace of flitting here for dinner and going shopping on the weekend and doing this and doing that, and then all of a sudden there was just nothing to do. And it was, the images of being served at a retail environment were sort of replaced. Uniforms, if you want to describe them that way, were replaced. This is what it went to in terms of lining up, keeping distant, markings on sidewalks, and all of that sort of like heavy instruction, restriction. Groceries, began to feel like a more arduous task, I think, than they had felt before.
And now like a holiday, because you get to leave your house.
Now like a holiday. It's crazy how expectations change so quickly. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about that Zoom fatigue, right? Like the endless sort of stream of as many of us are doing right now, sitting at our computers, trying to have the same conversations, trying to work through the complexity of challenges, and to your point about the work environment, doing it all sort of very mediated now, as opposed to over the shoulder, across the table, shoulder to shoulder, the way that it was.
So we looked back a little bit, and Sean highlighted all the things that felt pretty difficult, but it actually wasn't all so bad. And there are things, and this is maybe the first takeaway that we'd like to offer up, is that there were things that have happened to us in the last year that were actually good. And there are things that have fundamentally reshaped businesses, the way that we engage with employees and the way that we engage with customers. And one of those things, we went back to some of the simpler things in life. And now I do have to admit, it was Sean that put this slide together, so I really don't know anything that's kind of right of the paintbrush. But we went back to things that really mattered. We realized, and we kind of quieted down, and we realized the joy of making bread and having access to be able to purchase flour to make bread, the joy of being able to paint your home. I think the other things are gardening, and I don't. You can call
the one on the end is a Nerf gun. Just like chasing my kids around the house with a Nerf gun is a surprising new joy that I was probably overlooking before. But I think that's right. I mean, I think that the sort of forced slowdown also has the reflections of the things that we were maybe taking for granted in our own lives, and I think that it's offered brands kind of the same moment to say, what might we have been overlooking.
And then maybe slightly bigger than that, there was almost this sense of awakening. And in sort of the quiet and in being able to literally hear the birds chirp because the highways weren't so congested and the skies weren't filled with planes, there was this moment of quiet where we as individuals, as leaders, as organizations, as a world, started to pay attention to the things that really mattered. We started to maybe wake up a little bit more around social movements and some of the inequities in the world. And we started to question about our role in the world, our role as leaders, as parents, as partners, as brands. And so it's these things that we believe we need to take stock of and we need to take with us. So often, not that I'm comparing COVID to a vacation in the least, but in the past, I'm sure this has happened to every one of you, when we've been on vacation, you quiet down and you say to yourself, this is the person I'm going to be back when I come back from vacation, when I come back from break. And we come back from break, and within 2 weeks, we're exactly the same individual that we were prior to that vacation. And COVID, in its own way, has been a moment of asking us to take a step back, has been a moment of asking us to reflect. And I'm sure that as organizations, we have said to ourselves and to each other as colleagues, we're going to be different at the other end of it. And this is what we'd love to offer up, that there are certain things that we should absolutely be taking with us from this experience to help build better businesses for our customers and for our employees. And so this is what we'd love to offer up in the next section. It's some of the things to look forward to, some of the predictions that we are making based on the conversations that we're having with clients, based on our own observations of the world. And so, Sean, walk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, what occurred to me, I think, was the notion that, for those who've had any brush with COVID, one of the things is you lose your sense of smell. I've read all kinds of things about this. And you have to kind of retrain that sense. And I think, I wanted to use that as a bit of a metaphor for this discussion today to say, what do we have to retrain? What do we have to sort of rewire in our brains to come back on the other side of this thing? Stronger, better, faster, leaner, more attuned, I think, to the things that customers have been telling us or trying to show us, previously. And so thinking about those senses is kind of where we thought we would start the discussion today. And I think that there is a kind of new set of senses for a brand to think about. I would argue there are 5 of them, but I think that there might actually be more. New senses for the customer experience from here forward. And one of the things that we do is we keep an eye on kind of a lot of the trends that have been developing in such a discombobulated time. Things are moving fast, and we're all kind of fragmentedly only in the Zooms that we're in, or only in the meetings and discussions that we're in. And so we've been paying attention to the broader marketplace pretty keenly to figure out, what pilots are happening, who's trying new things, who's pivoting in what ways. This first sense that we would table is called safety spending. And I think that there is a notion around it that says, I want to go out back into the world and have these experiences. Some of them, the fundamental economics have changed for those businesses to be able to offer, et cetera. This one that I'm picturing on the screen, pre-COVID, there was an offering called the Private Suite at LAX, and it was highfalutin. You could kind of get your own terminal, so to speak, that you arrive to, and they park your car for you, and it acts like a hotel room, and then they drive you out to the foot of the plane. Post-COVID, I think one of the things that we're understanding is a lot of airlines are entertaining the idea that maybe the choke points of traditional security and the choke points of the gate and of all of those places where we as human beings kind of have to be forced a little closer proximity together, maybe we could offer to some customers who are willing to pay for it, a chance to basically go curbside to planeside, to do some of the things that we used to do in the terminal right out on the tarmac. And I think that we're going to see a lot of reinvention and revisioning of the way that journey works. Yeah. Not for all people, not for most people, for some people in some instances. And I think each brand is finding what these pockets are going to be as people rebuild these kinds of routines.
So I think about who we are as individuals and what we would typically spend money on. Pre-COVID, this would not have been my consideration, yeah. Right? Absolutely not. Now, would I invest more to make sure that my children, because I know the air is the cleanest on the plane. I heard somewhere it's cleaner than an operating room. But would I now invest in that experience to have a vehicle drive me to that clean air on a plane? It's a different reason. And the key takeaway here needs to be, you have to consider these mindsets of consumers and how they've changed, and engineer experiences, but also new revenue streams as part of those considerations. Because again, we're predicting that there will be a segment of customers that will pay for these seemingly higher end experiences, but it's not driven by status, it's not driven by profile, it's driven by their desire to stay safe or their desire to keep their families safe.
And I think there's going to be this like blurring about like, maybe I'm willing to spend like this and have what might otherwise feel like a bit of an indulgence, but I'm going to do it under the premise of, well, it's safer, and it's less of a choke point for us in the airport or something like that. And I think like that kind of logic is creeping into a lot of purchase decisions right now. Okay, where are we headed next?
Seamlessness. So for a very long time, and I'm sure you're all tired of hearing, COVID has accelerated our digital transformation. So for a long time, organizations have been talking about the importance of a seamless experience across digital and physical locations. I recently, and I'm pre-COVID, I was the last person to do anything online from a purchase standpoint. I loved the store experience. I loved everything about it. And I recently went and purchased something for my niece and I won't name the brand, but from a retailer. And I went in and online and I made my payment and I got a confirmation email. And I just assumed that in a few days' time, I would walk into the store and that product would be there. Just an assumption. I got a confirmation email, cool, transaction. Well, that didn't actually happen. And so it was, the brand actually expected me to follow up with them to say, hey, is my order ready? And this notion of, once I complete the order online, it has to now go through the journey. And if there's a glitch in your systems should know to alert me. It's not up to me to know your process. This is a critical component as we're trying to kind of rewire this constant back and forth between a digital and a physical experience.
And when you shared this story with me the first time, like I remember thinking, okay, so we literally have some brands over here re-landing rockets on the plane, and we've got other brands who can't quite figure out how to make a curbside pickup confirmation more intuitive as part of this journey. Yes. They're totally wildly different problems. Yes. I recognize. Yes. The engineering and the coordination and the reimagining that is required in your retail example, I would contend, deserves the same kind of energy and effort and whatnot, especially as consumers are watching these rockets take off and land and we're reaching for Mars and all these things. I think they take those expectations fairly or unfairly and they go, but you couldn't figure out the purchase confirmation to curbside pickup notification? Right. Like that seems crazy. Right.
And I would say on this one, this same lens applies when we think about our employees. So we're in this space in our studio, which for the last year has been virtual. Prior to that, it was more physical, and now we're moving into a hybrid, we're anticipating a hybrid model. Well, the same is true for our employees. Some will be here, some will be online, and so that seamlessness of when I'm online and when I come into the location and when some of my colleagues are still online, those are considerations that are going to be completely critical in making sure that you have engagement. Again, whether it's from a consumer standpoint or an employee standpoint.
Totally.
Simplicity is the other piece. So I got really excited about the fact that I can just click on my phone and that Sean and I don't have to have a code on who's going to advance slides or that we're passing the clicker back and forth. And a lot of businesses have layers and layers of complexity. And complexity from an employee experience standpoint, from a recruitment to the onboarding journey to how do you kind of grow people's careers, et cetera. And it's generally because we've designed from the organization's needs in mind versus the employees. And so the same is true when we're designing for consumer experiences. We're often thinking about what is our desired outcome as a business versus what is the desired outcome of Sean in interacting or doing business. And often it's make it super simple and make it super easy. And so that is another key consideration as you're starting to reimagine these experiences to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the set of senses we're talking about, they're maybe not like totally new concepts, right? Like if you're kind of listening in from home, they're not entirely new concepts. What they are, though, is wickedly sharpened in this moment. And on the other side of the experience that we've all had, your seamlessness one of sort of flitting back and forth between kind of an online and an offline world, and that not being a totally perfectly linear journey, and it not being a predictable journey, and it not being all of these other things I think we're functioning with as brands. These concepts are changing people's expectations, and they're rising. Like when you had this challenge at retail, did you call somebody? Did you chat somewhere? Did you what? Give me the sense.
So last sense is supreme expectations from the people that represent your brand. And so Spidey Sense said to me, I'm going to call this retailer and just make sure that now the order that I placed 7 days ago, they should have had 7 days, it's ready. I'm just going to call, mostly because I'm running late and I don't have the time to waste once I get there. And I called and they say, we don't have your order. And so I give the confirmation number and they explain the issue to me. And at that point, I was just like, listen, I have to be at my niece's in 30 minutes. Like, I'm going to come pick this up. And the lady transfers me over to another representative. And that representative made a world of difference because empathetic, apologetic, worked with urgency, and was like, within 20 minutes, you will have this for pickup. And so the aha in that moment was, once I get on the phone or interact with a human being, if your digital experience has let me down, the moment I have a person to actually express my concern to, I'm likely going to take it out on that individual a little bit, because I'm not thinking about all your complexity. I'm just thinking about what's happening in my world. And that representative, their actions will either build that loyalty or will completely erode it. And in this case, the brand representative did everything perfectly, and I was completely over the fact that this had happened, because I've got my objective accomplished, and I had an employee that treated me exactly as they should have in that situation. And so kind of the aha there is as you're engineering all of these moments along the journey, that human being will ultimately be the one that makes it or breaks it. We often talk about the last mile of the customer experience.
Yeah, that individual is living your same context, albeit from a different lens. They're in the lockdown situation. They understand we don't have all the mobility we normally have. We don't have all the time that we normally have. And so I think just channeling that and being like, okay, we're going to make this right for you is the sort of necessity in that moment for that context. Okay, here's the last sense that we'll leave you with is kind of the so what. I think this has been a period of time, and you touched on it in the commentary up front around awakenings. And I think that we as a commercial culture, we as a society, we as human beings who just happen to be called consumers in some aspects, I think we're all looking for a little bit more than the trade of money for goods or service. I think we want something additional, something of meaning. And I think a lot of the brands who seem to have done really, really well in the midst of this moment and will continue to do well is they've aligned kind of their purpose. They've aligned a so what. A subscription model for deodorant is probably in and of itself not novel enough, but that it is also a reusable container with sustainable packaging that doesn't leave more of a footprint on the world than it should. Those start to be sort of amalgamations of things that create more than the sum of their parts. Yeah. And I think that is the kind of thing that a lot of brands have an opportunity to take their aspirations and take the virtues and make them part of the way consumers feel it right at firsthand use level. And I think that's the kind of thing that is a new sense brands need to develop and retrain as they go back into this commercial culture.
I think the thing to really underscore there is that we're not suggesting that it's purpose over profit. It is purpose for profit. It's purpose that leads to profit, and you can get there, and we've seen many great organizations that haven't had to sacrifice profit for being a purpose-driven and a purpose-built organization. What we have also seen, though, is what happens when you're not that. And so I'm sure many of us remember United and the stock price that tanked because of the way a customer was treated. And I'm sure many of you sort of heard what's happened with the Ellen DeGeneres show. One of our colleagues and I were joking, because we both heard the same segment on the radio, that Ellen was in the echelon of Oprah and Dr. Phil in terms of viewership. And literally within weeks of these scandals coming out, she is now at the same ratings as Maury Povich. I didn't realize Maury Povich was still on air, but it shows you, consumers are paying attention. They are unfollowing very quickly, and employees are too. And we've seen this in our own world, employees are making a decision on what brand to engage with as an employee, what brand to contribute to, what organization they want to be a part of based on what that organization stands for. So we'll talk a little bit more about this notion of starting with purpose. But again, conversations we've been having for many, many years. We've seen organizations that have excelled at that, but there is, COVID has woken us up a little bit differently and has said, I'm not prepared to sacrifice what I believe in and what I believe a good business should be doing just for that product or just for that experience or just for that price. You have to have something that that you stand for and that you're built on.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing I think that cements the relationship between be it that representative of the brand or that customer who is adopting that brand and doing business.
So with all of that, we've traveled through time a little bit. I hope you all enjoyed a trip down memory lane of full planes and full shopping malls. We wanted to now change the tone a little bit and talk a little bit about the work that we do as an organization and really helping organizations and brands build and operate experiences that build bonds and also build business. So again, these two things are not in conflict with each other. They live hand in hand. And so a little bit about the way that we see businesses reimagining themselves over the next few slides. And Sean will kick off this next slide, but then I'm totally gonna go deeper.
So, I think you've touched on some of this at the beginning. Your anecdote about the sort of gift you were buying for your niece was a lesson, I think, in putting the person at the center, putting the purpose centric to who it is we're talking about, and whether that's a personified version of the brand and the brand's experience, whether that's the employee on this side of the counter and the experience that they're having and creating for a customer, and all of the touch points that customer has interacted with to bring them to that moment. And I think, when you get very clear-eyed about keeping the person, not people in sort of a general sense, but the person at the center of the purpose they came in with, the purpose they came to work with, the purpose that they are functioning in the world with, that your brand purports to be about. When all those things are aligned, that's when you sort of get that magic of the kind of thing that people stay wed to, that people want to be a part of. And I think that is the philosophy that we carry into a lot of the strategy work and the design work and whatnot. And so maybe with that lens on it, you want to walk through a bit of the sequence and the way that we go about doing that work?
Yeah, for sure. And so Sean opened up and said, we're putting people into commercial rocket ships, and this isn't rocket science. And so intuitively, as marketers, as CX professionals, we can sort of understand, logically, you define your purpose, what your organization stands for, and then you transcend that across the brand, the experience that employees and customers have with your brand, in the way that you show up for your employees and what their experience is, and then ultimately how that purpose transcends across the entire customer journey when your consumer engages with you. Right? It totally makes sense. You're like, yep, I can see how that might work. We know that it feels like rocket science to actually make that happen, because we have technological complexity, we have data complexity, we have organizational complexity, we have leadership misalignment, right? So it seems intuitive and easy, and it's like, yeah, eureka, that's how a great business is built. But the journey to get there, for all of us that have been in this world for a while, we know is onerous. And so we'll walk you through a bit of a process of sort of what that journey looks like. So first and foremost, everything that I'm going to walk through here includes constant engagement and co-creation with your audiences. Whether those audiences are, franchisee in a franchise environment, your employees, your customers, those that have loved you and left you, and those that are with you today. Constant engagement and a feedback process with them. But the first step and sort of the first phase of the work is actually defining what it is that your organization stands for. And what that organization stands for cannot just be what we stand for internally, what we stand for our partners, what we stand for our customers. It really has to be the same thing. What is it that you stand for? What, Simon Sinek talks about, what is your why? What is the why of your organization? From there, you can move into defining, okay, so then how does our customer experience vision deliver on that purpose? What is that customer experience vision? From there, we define the pillars. You can call them values, you can call them, or you can call them pillars, but essentially, if I were to deliver on my customer experience vision that's tied to my purpose, how would my brand need to show up for my customers, for my employees, right? Authentic, challenger, simple, purpose-built, whatever those pillars are, and we take those and then we journey map them. And we look at, okay, so at every single moment of interaction that an employee has with the brand, that a customer has with the brand, how are we today in delivering against those pillars and ultimately laddering up to our vision and our purpose, and how do we need to change those experiences to get us there? And then from there, you create a prioritization roadmap. Not all experiences are created equal from a balance sheet standpoint, and not all experiences are created equal in terms of what your customers ultimately value. And so we'll walk you through the methodology that we apply to kind of to journey map that process. And then there is the creation of a playbook. And this is really about, okay, so if this is the organization we want to be, how do we need to show up? What are the behaviors? What does this organization need to feel like? Again, for our employees and for our customers. And then we move into launching and sustainment. And at the core of that is a big, meaty topic is about changing culture. And changing culture is about enabling the organization, right? Like, I know where we're headed, I know what we need to do, I know how to do it, I have skills and knowledge. And then it's about also proper governance. How are we as a leadership team going to get together? What are the things that we're going to keep track of that are going to tell us that we're moving the needle, and underpinned by a really effective measurement strategy and a measurement technology that is constantly listening and constantly providing that feedback loop? And so a super simple snapshot, obviously much detail to go into this, but if you think about it as a logical progression of how we go from purpose into changing the fabric of our organization for our people and our customers.
And Morana, as I've seen you and your teams go through this work with some of our clients, I think, there's things that we innately sort of try and bring to that work. Like one, I heard you kind of rhyme off 4 pillars. There doesn't tend to be a dozen of these things, because if you can't do that,
you're in trouble.
if you can't do that mental checklist to go like, is it simple? Does it do that thing? You're not going to be able to push the right decision making far enough into the organization to scale out and live true to whatever that vision was or whatever that purpose lines up to. And so I think there's some real principled stuff behind this work, and then there's also a lot of practicality to the way that it sticks with people, and they can recite it themselves and put it in their own words and know when to go left versus right with a customer or an interaction or a decision about what you're going to do for the future. And I think that's kind of been nice to watch, is the balance back and forth between that principled, heavily researched, buttoned down kind of work that is also turbo practical and easier to implement, I think, than most people think when they set out on this journey.
And it's interesting, Sean, as I was driving here, I was like, I have to make mention of this. This is fundamentally a change effort. And often, and again, I'm sure at least some of you have experienced this. What tends to happen is, a purpose or strategy is defined, but the employees and customers know nothing about it, right? It's all kind of it's done in secret, and before it used to be done in closed door rooms, and now it's done in closed door Teams or Zoom sessions. Seeding the change that's about to happen and creating momentum, even before you know exactly where you're going to be, is better than sort of holding on, and then it's like launch, and we expect the organization to change. And so, even as you're defining if you're at the stage of, okay, we're really just gonna get clear on our purpose, we're gonna get aligned in the purpose, starting to drop and starting to communicate that you're down this path is better than, we're gonna get it all figured out, in our little towers, and then we're gonna launch it. Then that's what we mean by kind of constantly engaging the customer. So, a little bit about the journey mapping or the engagement mapping approach. We've seen many, we've evaluated many, we've taken a stab at different versions, and we can tell you, this is supposed to be a secret from the sponsor, not all journey maps are created equal. And so one of the things that we've been really doing over the years is refining our methodology for articulating that experience, that ideal experience, and what it is today. And so we deeply focus on the purpose and what it is that we want, what the organization wants to be. But then we move into a persona development for the sole purpose of getting to know the person. And we've talked about this in the past. Sean's partner and I might look very, very much the same as a persona. But once you start to get to know us and the way that we transact with the brand, our purchase behavior, et cetera, we start to take shape as completely different persons. And what technology and data has allowed us to do is to actually get to know Morana versus to get to know Sean versus to get to know Rob and Ryan, et cetera. And so as we go through that journey, we're constantly using data to inform our knowledge of the customer. And I would say as HR professionals and employee experience professionals, you have this exact same ability with your employees. Who I am as an employee, my tenure might be the same as Sean's, but who I am and what I value might be very, very different. And so data and technology allows us to get to know the individual for whom we can tailor the experiences for. Looking at digital and online and both, and frankly, before COVID, we would say this, and the brands that were there were like, great. The brands that weren't there were like, we're never gonna be completely digital. Well, now we know that we're going to sell vehicles online. And we're gonna purchase things online that we didn't purchase before. And so looking at what is that experience across both digital and in-person channels, considering the current and the desired state. So what is the current state against our pillars, and what is it that we actually need that experience to look like? And then ultimately quantifying the business impact of those changes, because you won't ever be able to do all things at the same time, but knocking off a few of the things that are going to have the greatest impact is ultimately going to get you there a lot faster. And so this is just part of the methodology that we apply. What we would say is great insight, consumer or employee insight, whether that's through qual and co-creation or quantitative, whether it's behavioral or attitudinal, is so critical in informing how we reimagine our businesses. Comments on this, since you've seen it happen a few times?
Yeah, I think the refinement is a real thing. I think people have been down the road of journey mapping for years, and as you say, they're not all great. Bringing kind of the rigor and discipline from a bunch of different lenses and a bunch of different angles, the way that you've articulated here, I think this is kind of the best known checklist for the way to go about this work. And I think your last point is the best one. You can't replace really great insight by doing the work legitimately, demonstrating that empathy, seeking the extremes, and all of those kind of components is what makes that work work. Okay, I think that was the discussion that we had planned. We've got probably about 10 minutes for some Q&A. I don't know if Lawrence and crew grabbed anything. Morana and I probably weren't keeping close track of the chat.
And we most certainly cannot see. That's one thing COVID has done to our eyesight, just made it worse.
Great job, guys. Let's just jump into it. There are 3 questions so far and 8-9 minutes to go. So the first question is from Sandra D. Question: how do we feel the public will react to offering services for a safer experience at a higher cost? And does that devalue the original service? Should the original service be safe enough to begin with?
Yeah.
Great question.
I think it is a great question, and I think the devil will be in the details. I know, Morana, you're going to have thoughts about this. The way that you posture kind of a new offering, a new service, especially if it is something that is only sort of available to a select few. I mean, we as consumers have gotten very acclimatized to the idea that says, if I'm Prime, then I can have this expectation about my interaction with Amazon. If I am not, then I just don't have that expectation. It's available to everybody. Yeah. When it comes to safety or something that is sort of a little further down on Maslow's hierarchy, I do think that there's an extra nuance there to be mindful of. And so at no point do I expect that the airlines are going to take anything less than every precaution they can take to offer the basic level of service. I think that the question from Sandra sounds like, when you layer something on top of that goes the extra mile, I think it's going to sort of flit back and forth between sort of like preference that is in some ways talked about as, potentially safer, but I don't know that that's going to be the explicit language. I think that's how a customer might come to the offering and make that purchase decision, but I suspect it will be about your preference versus my preference, and getting to know people on a the person basis is probably going to allow brands to serve this up to the right kinds of customers first. Yeah. And I think if there's transparency and there's authenticity to the offering, test and learn their way through it.
That's right. Yeah, and it's interesting, and it's such a great question. I would say you'll probably get backlash if you don't cover minimum expectations. So I'll use, the analogy of business class versus economy, right? The plane wasn't, maybe, but the plane likely is just as safe whether or not I sit in economy versus business class, right? They're just different comforts that I am paying for. And consumers were comfortable making those decisions. So number one, make sure that the new service offering isn't providing something that all consumers or all employees would have a basic expectation of, right? So this that would be a first kind of consideration. And then the second is, one of the first jobs I had out of school was selling mutual funds, and you're like, where's she going? And there was this thing, it was called Know Your Client, and it has stuck with me forever. And it's, so know your client in this context, know your customer in this context, do research, go and have conversations, put forward, market or product or offering studies to say, how would you respond? And there are ways for us to engage our customers and get their guidance of how they would respond if something like this was introduced, right? And that's the benefit of the world that we live in. We can engage with our consumers to get their reaction.
I actually think this is a moment, this might feel counterintuitive. This is a moment where there's so much reinvention going on. I think every brand on the planet has a ton of license to be trying new things and making new gestures and offerings to the marketplace under the total pretense of we're not sure what's going to work, there's no blueprint for this necessarily. And I think customers are very willing to sort of go on that journey and understand that it won't be perfect and it won't maybe meet all of their expectations right out of the gate. And I think that's actually a bit of a blessing in disguise about this period of time, this moment. Lawrence, do we have another one?
We do, and so and it ties very nicely in this one. So from our good friend John Dumo at SoftChoice, are there any nuances to consider for B2B organizations?
It's funny, I knew John was going to be on this, and I was like, I'm expecting a question around B2B. Very admittedly, John, I will probably send you a note and reflect on that. We've been predominantly focused on sort of a B2C organization. But I will give that some thought and make sure that it's available to everyone once we've answered it.
That's great.
All right. This one keeps coming up. Which metrics are becoming more and more relevant to understanding these kind of reset baselines of customer experiences to improve upon? For example, are we now measuring success from a new KPI lens than we were pre-COVID, or do the same rules apply?
Yeah, I mean, this is that's a question that doesn't have a one-size-fits-all answer. I think that from what we've seen from the brands that we are trusted to do this work with, there is a heavy reflection going on about the KPIs we went into COVID with, the OKRs and more outcome-oriented results that they're getting grounded in. There is a ton of noise in the data at the same time, and so you can't just sort of like continue on with the same. But I will say that kind of throwing everything out is also I've not seen that be the right answer anywhere. And so the sort of the refinement or the reflection, in one category, lifetime value has been sort of the holy grail of the way that they've thought about customership, et cetera. And I think, with a rebaselining and a refactoring of a lot of those analytics, you've got to be resetting those expectations. We're also living through a time where a lot more data is becoming available. Consumers got very, very comfortable with the idea of sharing their data in a lot more ways. We were all forced to have a lot more digital interactions with brands over the last year, for better or for worse. And I have a feeling that a lot of brands are sitting on new forms of data, some of it probably hiding in plain sight, where they could be using those as better lead indicators, maybe better general metrics, maybe better KPIs, in some cases certainly better OKRs. And I'm sort of rejuvenated by that, because I think that there was a lot of autopilot that now can kind of recede to the back, and we can be more thoughtful about the way that we value a customer coming back and reforming their habit or their routine or their behaviors differently since the end of all this.
I think the only thing I would add to that is, for super crass, businesses are in the business of generating revenue, generating profit. And so I don't think those metrics are going to get replaced. Retention, acquisition, customer lifetime value, frequency of spend, increased spend, et cetera, et cetera. I think the conversation needs to be about how do we believe we're going to get to those outcomes, and how we're going to get to those outcomes, at a greater exponentiality, given that we're going to have to make up for a lot. And that's where I think the conversation of today is really instructive, right? Like, an organization ultimately is going to want to make sure that they're driving profit and profitability and cost efficiency, and like those, I don't see those metrics changing. I do foresee new metrics being added in terms of diversity and in terms of the profile of customers, et cetera. But those hard kind of business outcome metrics, I don't see those being changed. I do see the way that we think about getting to those successes looking very, very different.
Lawrence, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, I see we have T minus 20 seconds. So there are two questions. We have two questions left that I'll send to you guys that we can fire out to the group here to share offline. So with that, we'll close this off, and thank you guys so much for today. I think this was an incredibly valuable conversation, and in true Bond style, thank you for over delivering to expectation. This is the schwankiest event I've seen, live from your beautiful studio. And we wish everyone a phenomenal day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.